In my two-part Thanksgiving message for 2024 that includes this video and the narration of my poem, The Phantom Limbs, I ask you this question. Because we're immigrants, old, infirmed, or homeless, we have no worth? As much as things change, they remain the same. I know this for a fact because as a poet, historian, and author of the 2023 book, Wrestling Through Adversity, where my poem is featured in the epilogue, I am now reflecting back to the 1990s when I wrote it early in the morning, the day after Thanksgiving, long before it was called Black Friday, and long after my ancestors arrived in America on the Mayflower. I recall waking up in a hypnagogic state from a dream about a tree that had been cut down in my neighbor's backyard. Since I had paper and pen nearby, I began writing the 5-stanza poem, starting backwards from the last stanza to the first. When working with clients as a peak performance coach, I call this action looking back to the future, which makes this poem as relevant today as it was over 25 years ago. The reason for this is that it refers to the current socio-political and cultural environment of upheaval of our government, regulatory agencies, court system, and American society itself, when everyday people and even the President of the United States, Joe Biden, are being dismissed as insignificant and defective without dignity, no matter what their contributions to humankind. They are being marginalized and are called garbage because they're deemed too old, feeble, infirmed, insane, and aliens. Today, they may be Latinos, Jews, Palestinians, Blacks, Asians, LGBTQs, Haitians, and others that society deems unworthy and diseased, making them feel emotionally impotent in this land of opportunity. You may think this deplorable treatment of people is new to the U.S., and perhaps you have been convinced that this is not who we are as a nation. But we must look back to our history to see that what's happening now is reminiscent of what occurred during the era of the American Eugenics Society from 1926 to 1972, during the whitewashing of our culture, when U.S. pseudoscientists supplied Hitler with ideas on how to exterminate the Jews for a pure race. At that time, marginalized groups of female immigrants were sterilized without consent and were ruled against by the U.S. Supreme Court in Buck v. Bell in 1927. My poem, The Phantom Limbs, pertains to everyone because you'll never know when you'll make that fatal mistake. You may recognize yourself in the poem as I speak in a metaphor about a tree and learn about who you are. Perhaps you'll see yourself as someone ill and disabled, or as one with a speech impediment, stroke, or ALS with no voice. Maybe you'll envision yourself as an employee whose managers deemed you too old and fired you without a cause before retirement age, or because you're impoverished on the streets and no one cares about you. This poem, during our Thanksgiving celebration in 2024, gives you hope and builds resilience because although you may be considered less than by others, you have human potential as the spirit of you and your ancestors live on, just like the precious oxygen-producing trees with whom we share our DNA that we continue to cut down during global warming of our planet. I invite you, as a peak performance coach, to click here in this two-part message to listen to the narration of my epilogue poem by Natalie Brower, to see for yourself how it relates to you, and to remind you that you are whole in body, mind, and spirit. And to quote Eleanor Roosevelt, no one can make you feel inferior without your consent. Happy Thanksgiving. I hope you enjoy my poem.